So a ton of people have been coming back to New World lately, whether that's because of the coming update, perhaps someone's friends got them to play again, or they just want to check on the game a year after its release. There is no subscription after all, so it's as simple as just reinstalling. No cost to you, except your time. But even if time isn't an issue, some have a problem returning to, let alone starting a game like New World, an mmorpg where just so many people are far ahead of you. Things like gear and money can be too much of a grind gap for some people. They may feel like no matter what they do, they will always be behind. And to be completely honest, that's the case for pretty much all of these types of games. And New World is certainly a lot less grindy than many of them. But in MMOs, you're generally always going to be behind somebody for the most part. It's impossible to compete with the so-called no-lifers, right? So why even start? Now, developers realize this issue, and they tend to deal with it on occasion by making the grind a bit easier. This can be met with some level of frustration by veteran players because it can make a lot of the hard work someone accomplished completely trivial. Those players that completed the more grindy task might feel disrespected in such an instance, but a developer is always trying to bring in new players, and by making some of the progression easier, for instance, streamlining an older system that could gate new players from newer content, especially if that newer content is part of a big advertising campaign to bring in new blood. It is a business after all, and so it makes sense. But there is another avenue to try and bring in new people, something done much less often, but when it's executed it tends to be very, very popular, and that is the implementation of a completely fresh server. And in regards to New World, I'm talking about one you couldn't transfer to either for at least like a month or so. I know they just added one, but none of those certainly had a normal progression line. They were in response to an insane influx of new and returning players. Now, these servers they just added, unfortunately, is a decent argument against not doing something like this, so please be sure to share your thoughts on this. I'm kind of back and forth with myself. Obviously, you don't really want to spread the player base too thin. This happened at one point around launch last year, and it led to some servers still being towards cap while others were pretty much deserted. It was a bit of a mess. But this fresh server ideally would be implemented after Brimstone Sands comes out, because that is when the new player experience will be completely revamped. Playing through from the start would feel very different, and for many of us who have been here since the beginning, we might want to take a second and see how that goes. Obviously, nothing is stopping you from making a second character somewhere else. By the way, 2 character slots seems extremely silly to me still, but I digress. Now, regarding fresh servers, many games have done some form of this. World of Warcraft launched the classic servers a few years back. This was probably the most well-known example to go by, also the most extreme example considering the amount of content they have to re-release. But it's certainly not limited to this one. Ragnarok Online did the restart servers back in 2017. Arcade has been starting a new server ever so often lately as well. And then you have some games which have implemented seasons, which is basically a fancy way of doing new servers with some extra rewards tacked on. Black Desert Online started doing seasons a couple years back, and that was obviously copied from a game like Path of Exile, which to me seems to have the most well-known implementations of seasons in an MMO. And while Path of Exile being considered an MMO gets debated a bit, I'm using it as an example here because it's implementation of the season system. Now, I'm not saying New World needs a seasonal system. I actually hope it doesn't get that, if I'm being honest. But a fresh server, I think, might draw in quite a lot of people for the first time. It would entice some veteran players to come on over and try the revamped progression. MMORPGs are always in a constant state of development. They tend to be very different years after release. Look no further than World of Warcraft from when it launched way back in 2005 until where it's at now. Completely different games. And while 1 year after New World's launch isn't a time frame to expect massive changes to the issues it had, it still could be a really good move to bring in a fresh set of eyes. I'm really curious about your thoughts regarding the implementation of completely fresh servers, and please remember by that I mean one that does not allow transfers. Totally fresh, everyone has a new character from the start, no twinked out newbies to deal with or level 60s transferring in flush with cash. Just an organic experience of how the game would be at launch. So please leave a comment if you care to. Additionally, leaving a like and subscribing goes a very long way in supporting me. Thank you for your time. Take care.